Welcome, everybody. My name is Dan Oseski, and I'm the Director of Standards at B-Lab. And I'm excited to offer you this orientation to B-Lab and the United Nations Global Compact's SDG platform. You are one of about 100 expert individuals and organizations who have been selected to be a part of the development of the content of our platform based on your expertise and knowledge on some of the specific sustainable development goals. And so I'd like to start off this orientation with a note of gratitude. And thank you all for being willing to dedicate your time and your expertise to contribution to this project, which we are excited about and think can be quite an influential, impactful tool to the marketplace. And so in this conversation, there's three things that we'd like to offer you to provide you the necessary context to provide feedback. First, we'd like to give a brief overview of the development process, both in where we've come from and where we're heading. And a bit of a background on how we've created the overall structure of the platform. Knowing that you all will be providing feedback on specific SDGs, it's important for you to get a sense of the bigger picture while you're doing so. And then third, offer you a few tips and instructions for how we'd like to engage with you in terms of providing you your feedback. And so onto the development process. At the core of this platform is a tool that B-Lab has had for quite some time, the B-Impact Assessment, which is a measure of comprehensive social and environmental performance of a business. And it predates the Sustainable Development Goals. And so the starting point was a mapping and gap analysis of the questions and content of that tool to identify areas that need to be developed for the particular purposes of the SDGs. In addition to that mapping and gap analysis process, we also engaged a group of high-level advisor organizations to help provide input into the overall structure of the tool to make sure it's meaningful and rigorous and credible. And then with that advice and the development of the overall structure and methodology, we've been able to develop some draft metric sets that we've had internal feedback and iteration with the UNGC and are now excited to be able to share with you all for your feedback. And with that feedback, we will in turn develop a new iteration and a new set of drafts that will be built into our beta testing process later this year before final revisions. And so looking at our overall timeline for what is a pretty ambitious set of tasks that need to be accomplished this year with an aim for launching in January 2020, I'd say we're about halfway through. We're really excited with where we are, but there's also an opportunity that we know to get the input and feedback from you that we're really excited about as we continue to iterate on this, both prior to launch and then after. Moving on to the overall structure of this platform, the objective of the tool is to be able to create an actionable impact management platform for use by thousands of businesses, all with an aim to help us as a world collectively achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And I think the key words here to help inform the context of the feedback that you'll be providing is at the very beginning here. It's an actionable impact management platform. The purpose of this tool is to complement what we see as a lot of tools that exist out in the marketplace that are oriented towards reporting and scoring and things like that, to actually provide an inward-looking tool that a company can use to not only assess themselves but identify what are concrete actions that they can take to improve. And so it's that lens and that interest in education and concrete action that has informed all aspects of this project. And so not only the overall structure and the development, but also the content that we're sharing with you all for feedback. Based on the input of our advisors, we also recognize that this tool needs to simultaneously provide an opportunity for a company or a user to dive deep and assess and manage their performance on specific SDGs, while also acknowledging the need for a degree of comprehensiveness and a recognition of the interconnections of all of the issues that have ultimately been embedded in the global goals. And so the approach that's been taken based on that feedback within the platform is to balance the two of those things through the creation creation of a baseline metric set that will be required of all companies who begin this process as a sort of introduction. That will actually be based on the UN Global Compact's 10 principles, and focused on the thematic areas of human rights, of labor, of environmental impact, and anti-corruption, with a lens towards the particular SDGs and what is most impactful within those 10 principles as it relates to the SDGs. And then there are 16 individual metric sets that are specific to each individual SDG that allows a company to dive deeper into in conjunction with that baseline metric set. You'll notice that SDG 17 is considered a transversal goal. And so rather than having its own separate section, it is actually embedded within the platform itself and the content of the questions that you'll actually see within any individual metric set that's been created. Within an individual metric set, there's a few key elements that you all should be aware of. First of all is, as mentioned before, the basis of this content is the B impact assessment. This not only allows us to utilize the iterative work that's taken over a decade for us to refine those questions and learn from how they can be crafted in the best possible way, but also allows us to gain value from the over 50,000 users of the B impact assessment with a ready-made data set for benchmarking purposes. And so there's about 2/3 of the questions in each metric set that are based on BIA questions, with about 1/3 that are actually new questions that have been developed to reflect the gaps that have been acknowledged in that tool. And our aim is to try to maintain that overall balance and rely on B impact assessment questions as much as possible for the purposes of that overlap and that value from the data set and the quality of those questions. Secondly, is the length of the metric set, and that each one has been designed to be about 30 questions each, which is what we've identified as a sweet spot in terms of allowing for a depth and comprehensiveness and rigor of the questions that are asked, while simultaneously not venturing too long to affect the usability of the overall tool, knowing that we want companies to complete the baseline metric set as well as multiple specific SDG metric sets. There's also an element of ensuring that this is of most value to our users to actually drive the change that we want to seek. And then finally, within all of those questions and based on the B impact assessment, there are a number of different types of questions that we'll ask, including the company's policies, specific measurement practices that they have, getting towards specific impactful practices beyond measurement, and then quantitative metrics, outputs, and outcomes related to those various policies, practices, and metrics. So the intent is to create a balanced approach to the sets of questions that are embedded within each of these individual metric sets, and they're organized by different aspects of a company's performance. And so at the conclusion of each metric set, there will be a performance visualization for a company that allows them to not only identify how they're performing on the SDG as a whole, but also broken down by some of these subsequent parts that you can see the parts here visualized from business model down through the potential risk of the company hindering the SDGs and having a negative impact versus a positive impact. And that's also informed and embedded in the metric sets that you're going to be reviewing. Importantly, this allows a company to compare their performance across SDGs as they complete them, benchmark within an SDG across these areas among themselves to identify strengths and weaknesses, and benchmark within an SDG to other companies who are using the platform. But they will not receive an overall score for the SDGs as a whole. It is all based on the individual metric sets to really enable this to be a management platform for the things that actually are most material and relevant to a company, and not necessarily focused on the whole. And so moving on to your role as contributors, we are thrilled to have you be able to provide feedback not only at a high level and some general feedback on the metric set as a whole, but also to provide as much as you can very specific proposed content changes. And so our feedback on both of those items is as much as possible to be concrete and actionable with the feedback that you're offering. And that it's always easier for us to be able to review that feedback and incorporate it when it's clearer and when there are very specific proposals that are on hand. Simultaneously, it's also very valuable for us to understand the rationales behind those suggestions, because it helps us both collate across the feedback that we've received from multiple contributors, but also understand what is the underlying issue that needs to be addressed and how we can be consistent in addressing those issues and prioritizing them based on all the feedback that we receive. And so with that in mind, we also like to acknowledge that while not all feedback is something that we are always able to act upon, we do review all pieces of feedback that you provide, and as much as possible, we do act upon them. And no matter what, we know that all feedback that we receive helps us ensure that the tool is as good as it possibly can be. And so both within this iteration of the process as well as future iterations, all the feedback that you can provide is incredibly valuable to us as we make sure that this is a meaningful, rigorous tool and ideally achieves our objective of changing behavior to contribute to the SDGs. Finally, as a contributor, if you'd like to, you can be publicly acknowledged, and in the feedback questions that you'll be asked, there's an opportunity for you to indicate whether you would like to opt in, and something that we always want to give credit for the participating contributors, but also want to acknowledge that in some circumstances, if you actually wish not to be acknowledged, we are able to accommodate that. When it comes to details of the participation, you with the email that you received this video on should have also received a spreadsheet, and in that spreadsheet will be a set of instructions, a set of general feedback questions, a draft of the baseline metric set that all people receive, and then a draft of the metric set that you have been selected to be a contributor to. Note that some of you may have been selected to contribute to multiple SDGs, and those spreadsheets will be set separately. We are sharing these in batches and as they are ready, and so as a result, we are only able to send these for one single SDG at a time. After you've reviewed the content, the instructions, the feedback questions, etc., our suggestion is to begin with the specific metric set that you've been selected for. And there's a column next to the questions in the spreadsheet that you would have received where you can provide any very specific suggested changes to those questions and answer options right there. And then our suggestion is, after you've done that, if you have any, then to move back to the general set of feedback questions and provide your overall reactions to the metric set that'll help us identify the overall strengths and weaknesses and areas of improvement that we need to make. All of this is being done via spreadsheet form to make this as easy and efficient as possible for you. So there's no toggling back and forth to other materials. And so the request is simply that you, once you've filled out that content in the spreadsheet and you've saved it, please feel free to email that back to us at B-Lab for us to review. And you can email that to my colleague Susmita, and her email address is skamath@bcorporation.net. With the batches that we're producing with these metric sets, our request is that feedback is provided within 3 weeks of the receipt of that metric set, which will be listed out in the email that you've received. We want to acknowledge that that is a timeline that we know is relatively brief, especially considering the fact that this is a time of year where holidays are quite frequent. And so while we need to maintain that timeline in order for us to achieve the ambitious deadlines that we have for the following steps of this process, we also want to acknowledge that this is not the only opportunity for feedback. And in fact, we are always welcome to feedback to the materials that we work on, even if it is exceeding any of the deadlines that we're working on. And so the most immediate next period in which we'll be soliciting feedback after this round is after we've incorporated the feedback that you've provided us over the course of the next month, is our beta testing period, which will occur in the month of November. And following that, we will then incorporate any final changes to the content of the platform for launch in January 2020. But even that isn't the end. We know that the goal of achieving the global goals is by 2030, and the principles that we have embedded in the B impact assessment and will replicate in this platform is one of continuous improvement. And so even after the launch of this tool in 2020, we know that there will be immense opportunities for us to continue to iterate and improve our content. And so with that in mind, we will continue to improve and refine the content that we have. We have yet to determine the exact timeline of those iterations. We expect that even after launch, there will be a lot of opportunities for us to improve quickly. And so we think there will be an incremental update that can happen soon after that launch. But then there will be a regular cycle through 2030. And so all of that is to say, any time that you're willing to provide feedback is feedback that we're happy to receive and consider as much as possible according to the deadlines that we have. And outside of those deadlines, we'll just incorporate those into further future iterations. And so again, we'd like to close with a note of gratitude and say thank you so much. We are really excited to hear your feedback. We know it'll be incredibly valuable and really help us develop this tool. But more importantly, we're excited because we think this feedback will help the companies that we work with improve their practices, and that we all have this collective objective of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And we think your input through this project will be a meaningful step in that direction. And so thank you again.